Grant Thornton Risk Week. I am Bhanu Prakash, partner ESG and Risk Consulting for Grant Thornton. I'll be moderating today's session, Ringing the Bell, Lessons from IPO Journey. I think about IPO. IPO, many think as a finishing line, but it's actually beginning of a new era. Right? It's just not ringing the bell. It's about stepping into a whole new world of enhanced governance, enhanced regulatory interactions, investor expectations. Most importantly, also organization go through its own cultural process transformation shifts as the organization gets listed and the subsequent journey. A warm welcome to all the panelists. Given all the IPO frenzy, so there's a lot of interest to understand how the company should get ready for IPO. So we have a August panelists here to share their views on basis their own experience of IPO journey from their past. So let me introduce the panelists. First, somebody who is an independent director on many boards, and also in his previous career has been the CFO of Titan. That's Subbu Subramaniam. Welcome, Subbu. I have next Anurag on my screen. Anurag is a CFO of One Source Specialty. Anurag has a unique experience of listing a subsidiary of a listed company. I'll talk about it more and look forward to your views from you, Anurag. I have next on my screen Ashish. Ashish is the CFO of Vikran Engineering. Again, Ashish comes with an experience of a owner-managed company being listed and the subsequent journey. I have Sumit on my screen, last but not the least. Sumit has helped the company to a private equity-backed company to list, CFO of Akums Pharma. Thank you. Welcome all for this session. I think with this background, unique experiences, I'll explore a couple of topics. Maybe first to start with culture. I think it's before the organization really plans for listing. There are a lot of anxiety and also planning. A lot of planning happens. So let me probably start with exploring that topic. Maybe I'll go with you, Subbu, first. Subbu, I think from your experience, what do you think are the top three priorities for a company to plan when they plan for listing?
Yeah, thanks, Bhanu, for having me here. Hi to all the fellow panelists. So I think I've gone through this journey at least twice now, two different companies. So it's a process that takes time. And I think the first thing you start with is thinking of governance. And when I say governance, you start with the board compositions, right? Typically, when a company is a startup, particularly if it's a startup, they operate in a very, very different way. I mean, it's the founder along with the private equity guys and the investors who, in a way, decide how the company moves forward. And most of the discussions primarily are on business and business metrics, right? And how do you get to milestones after milestones? I think that's where it starts. But the moment you look at an IPO, then you got a whole lot of things that you got to start thinking about, which is compliance, governance, having boards and reporting requirements, right? So those start coming up. So I think the first thing is, in most cases, most companies start looking at the board to start with. You need a board composition which is not there just to endorse what the promoter or the investors are looking at, but those who are actually there to challenge them as well, question them, and not from a negative perspective. It's actually also something which is very, very productive. I've seen when people do ask these questions, and many promoters, at least the ones I've interacted with, have been very receptive about questions which come up like this, because sometimes it's the experience, sometimes it's the knowledge of having gone through some of these aspects and so on and so forth. So I think board governance, therefore, the composition of the board in terms of, you have the normal committees, the audit committee, the NRC, the risk committees, and so on and so forth. But the important part is, are you manning them with people? The independent directors to start with, are they adequately bringing in the capability for the board as a whole? I think that's an important aspect to start with. Secondly, even the board meetings, when you are a startup, these tend to be very transactional, right? Whereas when you have independence on your board, etc., the conversation is very, very different. It's far more strategic. So, are you even ready to discuss that? Are you ready to question, to be questioned on strategy itself? And those are the questions which have to come up. And promoters, for example, need to understand that that is where the experience of a board matters, and it should count a lot for them as well. There are, of course, the other things about finance, accounts, etc. The ability to have accounts being prepared quarterly, being reviewed within the timelines, etc. Those become very important. But if you ask me, those are still doable. The bigger issue for me has always been about the board, how the board itself runs, because finally the board is responsible for the management of company. So I think that is one aspect of it. The second aspect I would think about is the business model itself. Because when you're a startup, when you are starting, you are scaling up, you're looking at revenues, you're not looking at bottom line, right? You have money to burn, which is all fine. But at some point, once you've IPO'd, the the investor, and we've seen this now over the last many years, the investor is no different from an investor uh, who evaluates legacy companies. They are no different. Finally, the metrics are similar. It's about the same PE ratios, same growth. Everything is similar, right? The governance standards that are required, all of them are similar. So finally, it's a level playing field in one respect, and therefore the business model, therefore, is something which people need to think about. And typically, as you see it, most companies would try to be at break even or profit before they IPO. My point is that may be good enough, but I think you need a story which is definitely panning out that this is sustainable, this is going to grow, and therefore this enterprise is going to be far more profitable in the future, which in a way justifies the valuation, right? So I think business model becomes one very, very important aspect. And the third thing I would say is something which I think a lot of startups miss, and I've seen this in my own experience very badly: processes, right? When you're running an organization, you're running it so fast that the one aspect of the business which actually gets the short end of the stick is actually processes. Um, and these are something that in legacy companies you take for granted because we've all grown up in legacy companies. I have at least for decades, and therefore you know exactly how important a process is, right? And young promoters sometimes don't see that value of that till they actually start getting hit very badly because of a lack of process. And that's when, it's like firefighting almost that happens. So getting your process right is, I think, equally important. Otherwise, you are going to get embarrassed a lot after your IPO. Okay, and you don't want that. So I think if you ask me, these are the three big things that I would talk about. Yeah.
Sorry. Thanks, Abhi. I think you have nicely given me the topics for the next few conversations when I explore the topic. You talked about board, a constructive, healthy, debatable, challenging board, which will add value, a good business model, and robust processes. I think as a process and risk expert, I love the last one as process. Thank you for that. I think having sorted of what is needed, I think it's also important to deliberate about the timeline. And maybe I'll come to you, Sumit. Sumit, you have gone through multiple IPO journeys. It will be great to hear your views on what is the realistic timelines companies should plan before when they think that okay, they have to plan for an IPO. What's the months and years they should plan for an IPO?
Thanks, Bhanu. I think I'll take from where Mr. Subramaniam left. Right. So first is the strategy part of an IPO, right? Typically, the five experiences that I have are where there were private equities and there were exits. But like he said, you, it's most important first to have a strategy. Let's go on a board to first consult the auditors. I tell you why it becomes important. If you have strong segments, you report financials in a particular way where you cannot bring out the strengths, and then you're writing the DRHP, then there is a circle up issue, right? So I think the first part is the strategy where you, like you said, the business model. Now, how does the business model pan out? You look at the USP of the company. Now, if it's a one segment, one business, nothing much, but the way we see Indian companies, we diversify. So we bring out the strengths in a way where we like to present our historic financials, because earlier it was 5 years, now they talk about 3 years, right? And so you build out a clear strategy with the auditors to see how can they come back to report the financials. Board, as Mr. Subramaniam were mentioning, the board needs to be in loop. There are various things you'll have to look at, your investment agreements, where there's a what is the object clause, why do you really need to go for an IPO, how are you going to be more transparent, ESG, business sustainability, and reporting for top 1000 companies become compulsory now, right? So I think those baby steps of strategy are very important, right? Now, let's say once we've decided there's an IPO which needs to be done, I think uh, a quality team, if you have a good PMO office and a good team, I think this is doable between 6 to 9 months. From an outward framework, from a strategy to an execution, it could be 18 months, and that's how I would look at it from the timelines. But I think it's a very collaborative process from all the stakeholders. In one of my experience, the promoter did not want to dilute at all, right? And then you're stuck between that 25%, which you need to do over a period of 3 years, and then that the primary, secondary mismatch is happening. So I think the strategy part, leaving from where Mr. Subramaniam said, I think the strategy part is the important piece, and then the team comes in to do the execution. So, Bhanu, I think I would probably define the timelines this way, based on my experience and what I've heard from other colleagues.
Thanks, Sumit. Thank you. I think you're basically saying a year of warm up and another 6 to 9 months of sprint is what companies should plan. I think that's nicely fits into. I'll come to Anurag to understand in a slightly different perspective. Anurag led the listing of a subsidiary of a listed company with mergers and demergers which are going on in parallel. So, Anurag, from your experience, what is a suggestion to a company which is on a similar path to drive integration as well as maintain the strategic focus of business of different sizes and scale? Because each of the companies are at their own size. So how do you drive that integration and still maintain the focus?
Hey, thanks, Bhanu. So first of all, thank you, Mr. Subramaniam and Sumit, for your views, because I'm going to actually integrate what you said earlier in part of building my side of the response. So you see, if listing an organization is so complex, if you are preparing for it, by putting multiple mergers, acquisitions as part of the same journey, you just multiply the complexity of the problem. And therefore, you have to really be smart and sharp about how you're approaching to problem solve it. So the way I would say, and it has worked for me, is to break down the problem in two distinct, very diverse work streams. And like Sumit talked about the PMO, of course, I mean, critical to making sure that is part of the process. Take those two streams of integration and listing and try to make sure that you somewhere marry the journey together as you go along. The critical path for integration is going to be thinking about just the whole integration planning. It starts from processes, systems, financial reporting, risk management, all of the harmonization around policies and processes. And then the big part around people and culture. So that's a whole work stream by itself. Take it to a point where you are starting to build the equity story for a listed organization, because that's when rubber hits the road, right? I mean, you have to now start talking about how you're going to present the financials of an integrated company, making sure that you have the right level of information and the right amount of information, which is not too much and not too less, and making sure that becomes part of your equity story. And then you work towards all of the other elements in terms of, your governance framework, your board, working through the complete, communication back and forth with different stakeholders in terms of, all of the elements of your narrative, your value creation process, and then, going out there. As you work through all this, I think one of the things that will come really handy is to be able to run some kind of a mock-up process for at least 2 quarters. If you're getting first time listed, the big change that comes in is to start reporting quarterly financials, audited quarterly financials, of course, limited review. And for an unlisted company, that's a big shift. So to be able to integrate that into the process and making sure there is good rhythm around, auditing and making sure that your financials are reviewed by the board is going to be something very, very significant. So all in all, I would say it's complex, but at the same time, if you follow the basic principles and try and work through, two very distinct streams coming together to create that symbiotic, value offering to the stakeholders, I think it finds a path of its own and works very well.
Thanks, Sandra. I think if we sort out what's the story and if we sort out how the story will play, and I think you said what are the levers for the story, I think next big element is on how does the organization gear up for it. And I'll probably come to Ashish here. Ashish, your experience of listing an owner managed business private to public, cultural shifts are very critical in this entire journey. So
Yes.
what is your suggestion for companies on how do they drive that cultural change to align the organization for listing?
So I'll just I'll do the same as continue with all the three colleagues what they've discussed. They've discussed about the independent directors, quarterly reporting, and how the things have changed. So definitely all these things need a cultural change in the company. And for us, or for most of the companies, I would say it is in two phases. One is from private to public, and then public to listing. So there are two, you can say, part in this journey. And normally I've seen, because I've worked with various promoters, including in South or Calcutta-based promoters or Marwari promoters or others. So it's more about most of them are reluctant to make a company public till the time it is actually required, till the time they feel that, yes, they have to go for IPO. Sometimes it is about some disclosure, but yes, definitely once you go for public limited, yes, there are some additional costs of compliance also is involved. Because whenever you go to any consultant who were working with the private company, now the moment you become public company, they say, no, now our risk is slightly higher. So that is there. But yes, it is, not very high cost. But that's, I would say it's a two-way journey. So one stage is once you convert from private to public, there are so many additional disclosures which you have to do. And all those things will start coming into your culture by start giving all those additional disclosures, or you can say, as Anurag was saying, that you should start doing the quarterly results internally, even though you don't need to publish, but still you should start it. And that's how you are preparing yourself for the next round when after listing LODR requirements are started, and probably those things will help you. The sooner is better. So that's what is important. For doing it, I would say we need to lay a proper foundation, which is aligning the culture of the company as well as looking at the overall vision and mission of the company and considering the industry where you are working. So that is very important when you are laying the foundation of that culture and that cultural change which you want to bring. For us, it was slightly easy though the promoters are, I mean, it was a promoter-driven company, but the promoters were having a professional background. They have worked almost 25 years in various organizations. So yes, they, I mean, understand the requirement, how the public company run, and that's where it was slightly easy. I mean, align your views and the cultural change requirement with the top management. Once both of you are aligned, then definitely things are much easier to implement. And that's what, I mean, I would say someone should do that. One is bifurcated into two phases. One is from private to public, and then public to listing, and then work with your top management and promoters, and you can implement it smoothly.
Thanks, Ashish. I think you're saying, tone at the top, making sure that the team, the leadership is aligned for it, and then how do you drive the similar message to the next layer? I think I really pick up one thing, and I definitely would like to amplify to a lot of our clients is if just from private to public, risk changes, so the fee should go up. Definitely. Thank you on that front. I think we have sorted on the planning timeline. So it's about how do you plan for you to reach the IPO. And once you are listed, once the bell rings, the game changes, right? Then it's all about how do you live up to the governance, how do you live up to the technology changes, how do you bring the processes to make sure that the company is now more working as a limited company. I think so. I probably want to explore that topic a little more, and I will make a little more one step back before we come to that is once you would have also onboarded many independent directors, at times post-listing also then you lag, or there may be a change in the board. So, and I want to maybe pick this up with Subbu. Subbu, from your experience as a board member, having been on multiple companies and having interacted with multiple other independent directors, I think it'll be interesting to know what aspects do independent directors evaluate when they're planning to join a board which is about to list or has just listed?
Yeah, this is a very important part because there are a lot of people who come out on LinkedIn saying, they try to associate saying, no, I passed the independent directors certification. Now what do I do, etc. Can I get into a board very quickly? It doesn't work like that at all. Unfortunately, that's very easy, but it doesn't work like that. I think it's entirely about what can you bring to the table, right? To any board. That's I think you have to start thinking about your contribution to a board before you even look at anything. So the way I see, and I have done this so far, is what sort of a board is already there? Because, and it may even be an IPO company which is starting a board. One of the boards I've just joined is like that. But in that case, then it's about the promoter, it's about the investors, and what sort of feel do I get when I meet them? For me, that chemistry part, as we call it, is practically the most important. Okay, I need to feel comfortable that this is a board where one can express one's views without inhibition and also have very healthy conversations, right? Around all aspects of business and governance, right? I think that's the most important thing. Are they receptive? And who else is on the board? For me, that is equally important. Sometimes it's very enriching when you have very, very good people on the board. I mean, some of the boards where I am, it's privileged that you are there, part of that, because you are learning also. See, one of the things that you're going on the board is not that you're going to give a gyan, but it is actually also learning. You're going there to also learn as much as you can possibly give from your experience. So it's very interesting to also find out who else is there. So from a board perspective, I think that chemistry, I think, is an important aspect for me. Okay. Is it an open board, free? Conversations are open. Can we discuss anything without fear? And so on and so forth. That's, I think, one aspect of it. The second part would be the business itself, the industry itself. Am I excited by it? I think it's very important. Sometimes you take on companies because of just the purpose of that company, right? And that purpose engulfs everything else. You're saying, fine, this is really very worth investing your time because what the company is trying to do is something very good for for anything. It could be for India, for society, it could be for any of that. So sometimes it's purely that. And then you don't look at any other consideration other than the fact that it's good to associate with such organizations which are trying to make a change. So that is one aspect of it. And it doesn't mean that commercial enterprises are not the same. I mean, all organizations have a certain purpose, and therefore it's a question of finding the purpose in each of the companies and associating with it. I think that's the way I would see it. But of course, the most important thing, most independent directors would certainly look are the risks. That is the biggest issue today for an independent director. And there are even case laws today which are actually saying that it doesn't make a difference whether you're an independent director, non-executive or an executive director when it comes to responsibility to the board. So the fact that you are going to be on the board means that you are frankly responsible for anything and everything that the company does, right? And it could be something totally out of your comfort zone. And simple things like safety. I mean, I say simple, it's not to belittle it. It's a very, very important aspect. But how much time do we even discuss safety in the boardroom, right? I'm just saying but something goes wrong there and the entire board is going to be held responsible. So I'm just saying every aspect of this therefore becomes very important. And when you look at risk, it is not just the compliance from a law perspective, right? I mean, there are so many laws. I'm just talking of Companies Act itself or SEBI regulations, all right, or MCA. But it's also now NAFRA, which is looking after going to a lot of these aspects. So as an audit chair, for example, I need to be informed well about what NAFRA is looking at. And this whole papers on audit committee and auditor interactions, etc., I think are very relevant, right? So keeping yourself abreast of all that is important. But then the risks are also from an industry perspective, right? And there the regulatory risks are, I mean, we just saw one small industry just collapse overnight, the gaming industry, right? The money gaming industry just collapsed overnight because of a regulatory change. Therefore, looking at every aspect of risk, and this is not necessarily only risk for the independent director, but for the organization itself, is, I think, a very, very important aspect of how do you select, therefore. And therefore, if you think those risks are outweighing, and of course, as I said, the most important finally is governance. If your financial statements are not okay, you have issues with basic governance there. I mean, it's far better to stay away from such companies. So I think these are some of the things that one considers when you look at accepting an independent directorship.
Thanks, Subbu. I think you're essentially covered trust and integrity element is the most key aspect which independent director will evaluate when they're on board, looking at joining a company. I think you talked about financial reporting integrity. I think that's a nice segue to my next thing which I wanted to explore with Ashish. Ashish, financial reporting integrity means the organizations to gear up for a quarterly close at a predetermined time with timelines and accuracy and comfort to the various stakeholders. So what is your suggestion on how companies should strengthen their quarter reporting or year-end reporting mechanism, book close mechanism, as we say, as they go from private to listed company?
For me, I would say, like, as Subramaniam sir said very correctly, that I mean, today independent directors' risk is quite high, and we have seen in various cases in past where the whole board was held responsible for whatever decisions were taken by the company. And definitely, I mean, when it comes to trust and integrity, this book closure process is very important and timely. So that way, yes. But I won't link it with the listing thing. I would say this is something like which a company should adopt from starting. You should have, because this is not something that you want to show to somebody outside world that how you are at, what are your timelines to close your books and how, I mean, the proper book closing, timely closure of books is very important. And that's what I have learned in my previous organization. And when we were discussing about even 3 years back, we have started implementing SAP. We have adopted almost similar process, which is like for Ind AS, which is required. So that way, it was very helpful and smooth for us, the transition from private to public. So this is, I would say, it's a continuous process. One should not wait for when I'm going to public and we'll do this, or when we are going to list, then we are going to do this. As Anurag rightly mentioned last time, that you should start practicing it before it is applicable. So if you do that, that definitely will also come in your into your culture. The team will understand the requirement, and it will be very helpful for the company that whenever they want to go public, it is not a big transition. It will take lesser time. So that way, as a, I mean, finance head, I would advise to everyone that one should build a culture of timely book closure. It is not linked to any cost. It should not be linked to any listing. And there might be some disclosures which are required additionally once you go listed. Those things probably you can see whether as per your industry, which needs to be included at this time or not. But apart from that, on the book closer side, I would say uh, keep it as advanced as you can say up to date as much as possible. That will definitely help the team to understand what are the requirements. That will also help you when you are transitioning from the old method to, let's say, when your Ind AS implemented, or when you are going for a new um, system implementation. And for that, actually, now we are in the technology world, and uh, uh, I was mentioning about SAP we've implemented. There are so many tools you have today while doing this book closure activity, where you can implement those softwares to have a proper control tools with you. And that's where probably like today, if we want to close our books on a particular time, we first of all, we close it for our material management team and sales team. They have to close it first. Afterwards, we will stop their rights to make any entry. And once that they are closed, then our accounts, the expenses team will close all their accounts. And then finally, it will be a final entries by depreciation and finance related entries, which is going to do by accounts team, and then the books will be closed. So that's how we can use our this current technologies for a better book closure process and strengthening that with the timelines. And that's what I would say.
Thank you. I think you're basically saying early adoption, strengthen your finance team, identify complex areas so that those are addressed first, so that the things, I have a game plan so that you are able to meet those timelines. I think, thank you. Thanks for bringing those perspective, Ashish. I think quicker closure means technology can play a role. You did touch on it. I'll probably now lean on Anurag to, get his views on how can technology be an enabler in the post-listing phase.
Hey, thanks very much, Bhanu. As you think about organizations, pre and post listing, it's the one dimension that has the most significant transformation is the dimension on governance and compliance. So it may be coming out of the fact that we are, Mr. Subramaniam very well alluded, there are three things that attract a good director on the board. Of course, the purpose of the organization, how are the people on the team, and then the third is the governance and the compliance framework, right? The most important aspect, not just for the board, but for the customers, the suppliers, the various stakeholders for an organization, including employees, is actually feeling secure in an environment where things are, they are controlled well from a risk management standpoint, and they are done in a compliant manner. That is something that attracts all different stakeholders. And therefore, it is extremely important to start that journey much earlier, use all the best tools that are available. Technology, of course, goes without saying, is a big game changer in that journey. Um, but think about the complexity of the legal requirements, for any organization. And then there are dimensions that keep getting added based on the industry that you serve. There are multiple such additional regulation. But even if you think about any generic industry, even then, the list of compliances that you have to actually make sure that you are complying with is absolutely humanly impossible. So therefore, I would say a big thumbs up for any technology tool that can enable that, because there are multiple sites, multiple locations. Each of the location have their respective compliances. Variety of tools are available, and it does different level of complexity. It gives you different level of ability across different tools. But most often, you get those dashboards, those real-time prompts saying that, hey, listen, this compliance is coming due. Please make sure somebody is getting it done. And it goes to the stakeholder who's actually supposed to comply, to his manager after a certain point of escalation, and then finally gets into the dashboard saying that so many compliances are completed, so many are. That doesn't stop there. In fact, if you're wanting to build a journey, you have to build additional controls on top of it. I would say somebody monitoring that dashboard, somebody doing a periodic test of evidence underlying that reporting. You know, those are things that should become part of your integrated structure in terms of compliance and governance, which will be a big game changer, and it will attract people around. And when I say compliance, I mean, bear in mind that my response is holistically covering compliance, risk management, and governance, because um, it's not just compliance that is your license to operate. It is also your ability to predict what is happening and keeping an eye on any kind of emerging risks, either regulatory or otherwise, that we should all keep an eye towards, so that we are continuously building our preventive and detective controls around many of these dimensions that are emerging. That will create the sustainability for the organization in the future. And that is what will attract our different stakeholders, including investors, shareholders, directors, all alike. In summary, I would say it is, if there is one thing that is most important in your journey towards listing, it is the compliance and the governance framework. And you have to put all hands on the deck. It is the tone from the top, the leadership, enabling tools, employees culturally moving from an reactive to a proactive compliance culture, not finding fault, but making sure that you are following the law of the land. I think that is the big change that has to be embraced by organization in this journey.
Thanks, Anurag. I think so. Technology, yes, does play a role in making sure the CXOs and the board sleep well at night. I think that's a message I'm taking from this, and I'm sure. Yes, you're right. There are multiple tools which the companies can leverage to make sure they're efficient. They're able to make sure the compliances are taken care, and most importantly, are being seen through what is coming next. I think that's important. I think one is the technology. The other element is, a technology is only so good if the people are not ready for it, right? So I think that's where I want to probably pick Sumit's views on how do you train people, or what do you do, how do you guide people, your teams as you move to a listed environment.
Right. So I think integrating cross-functional team in any corporate is the biggest challenge, right? So IPO isn't just the finance department, right? They can do the financials, they can probably look at the KPIs and some of the other things which are required, right? But just building the story, the milestones, right? Uh, how did the company start? I mean, the stories, most of the promoter and organizations generally have a rag to a riches story. Now, somebody being able to articulate that, how they started and where they go and what is their vision ahead. Now, that's a part of integration between the owners and the management. So one other thing which is very important is ownership and management. So part of the journey will come from the owners where we were talking about the milestone. And that's when the management team comes in. Now, the other very difficult part in my experience has been building the share capital in the DRHP. Right. If you have an organization which has a long history, it's very difficult to build out their capital structure. Right. So that's where the secretarial team will come handy. Now, when you're looking at your business team, they're the ones who look at your peers, they look at really what are the KPIs which match with yours and theirs. So each of these teams, human resources, identifying what are the qualification, what are the resources in each of the verticals, what is the history, how do you highlight the management team, the KMPs and the SMPs. It only is possible if you have this cross integration. And then let's look at the basic thing, the data room. Right now you can't have a data room collated if you don't have the R&D team. Like Anurag was mentioning, now the compliance tool, right? If you know what are the licenses, I mean, you'll be more than 400 compliances to be done on each of these factories, but they want to look at it. Now let's move our framework to the legal team. They'll have to tell you exactly what are the liabilities that will stand in the DRHP on the legal side, and then what has to be recovered on the legal side, right? So I think the PMO team, a checklist, a cross-functional, let's say what a champion or a coordinator across departments, and that's when you chalk down who's accountable to do what. And that's when you will meet your calendar. See, this has to be calendarized. You are given particular days between which your financials hold true in a DRHP, right? Then you have the updated DRHP and all that. So if you are not meeting those timelines which are framed in your calendar, it's it's a no-go. And I have seen an experience. I mean, if you are in a seasonal industry and if you don't catch the season, some of the times you have not the right numbers to present. You look at the agri side, you'll have a 70% on the Kharif, and then you have Rabi. So you companies like to go with Kharif season and then the Rabi follows, right? That 6 months look really strong because that's 70% of the revenue. So I think timing it is very important, the way you want to position your story. So each of the each of the members would become very, very important. The other thing which each of the managers need to do is now the business plan. I think Mrs. Subramaniam touched on it. So the story with all companies is past was bad and the future is going to be excellent, right? And that's where you tell the stories to the anchor investors who will probably raise hands for your valuation. While you have to be optimistic, but you really have to be realistic because you're selling it then, and then if the promoter has just sold 1% or 2%, that tells the remaining value of his remaining 75% in a worst case, right? So that if is understood clearly that this is value creation for all stakeholders, and believe me, by selling it expensive to a minority shareholder, you're not going anywhere because these guys are smart on the outside. Huh? They know really what you're talking. So I think as I keep saying, the strategy part and a lot of transparency ethics came in, right? All that, your intent and ability should show out clearly in your management team and in all your working. So I think somebody said the culture of the organization. That probably, no institute teaches hard work, honesty, and integrity. It takes 3 years to get a chartered accountant. It probably takes a shorter time to get an MBA. But if you have those qualities in your team, at the top and probably middle or the bottom, it probably changes things. So I would like to say that uh, be very honest in what you're doing, have a very optimistic but realistic approach.
Thank you.
That would be important for each of the departments when they come together to build up a document for the shareholders. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumit. I think you talked excellent. I think it's basically if the show has to run well, it has to be a good orchestra, and everybody has a role to play. It's just not the finance function role or the secretarial function role to make sure the company is ready for listing. It's everybody who has to go through that journey, and your ability to curate a cross-functional team, put up that PMO team which can take everybody along and run a fantastic show, I think is the key takeaway for me from this. I think one is to plan for listing, second is to list once, and then the show has to sustain, right? For sustaining a show, obviously we have to keep few things in mind, also have to keep guard ourselves against certain surprises or certain areas which are always considered as a significant reputation issue. So I'll probably just want to explore those elements. And maybe I can start with you, Sumit. You talked about bringing everybody along. If we have to bring everybody along, it's also about how they are rewarded, how they are incentivized. Up to listing, it's a North Star. Everybody wants to align their incentives for the listing. How does that incentive structure, the thing changes post-listing? What's your suggestion to people?
So I'll tell you, I'll start with those baby steps. When we were listing and there was this bell ringing ceremonies that have to happen. I had the junior most person in my department coming to me and telling, "Mujhe wahan jana hai." He was so keen to see how that whole hard work is going to pay off, right? Now, there are those emotional parts and there are the financial parts. I touched on the emotional parts because that really touched me, that person coming to my room. And then we sort of took a large team there because we wanted all of them to experience it. But I think somewhere where we are in our corporates, people who are loyal people of the organization, who've grown with the organization or the organization has grown with them. So I think one is very important to take those people along who have seen the rough time and come where they have come. And now is where you need to have the talent. Like I think we talk about startups. I mean, most of the startups come with youngsters. So at my age, people don't want to do startups. They don't want to take any risk, right? So to have this young talent to come up with new ideas with AI coming in, how do you attract them, right? So these youngsters are very different. They don't want, a lot of boundaries, but they will be given targets and they probably will want to achieve that. Now, one is their financial package, and second is really looking at how do you give them wealth through ESOPs and milestone-based deliverable. Now, the complexity that has come in is now the ESOPs can't be just linked to your performance. It has to do with your KPIs. It has to do with ROCEs. It has to do with the EBITDA, because that's how the market is evaluating the company. So I think really what, Bhanu, I would say is that when you're incentivizing people and rewarding people, there could be a framework where you're giving them a part for their performance, company's performance, department performance, and overall, market understanding. You cannot have your value created and you don't have the shareholder value there. So I think the ESOP scheme on the wealth that we wish to distribute, and believe me, most of the investors I go on roadshows are very keen to know how are we retaining the management team, right? So people who are adding value to the promoters, to have them continuously there would be very rewarding. So I think having this schemes, disseminating them in a manner which is most meaningful for the employee and the company would be most important. So that's how I would like to say, and that's how I would rest my case.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Amit. I think essentially you're saying it has to be married to organizational performance, functional performance, individual performance, and long-term oriented, because it has to yield value to shareholders as well as to the employees. That's when the real wealth gets generated. Thank you. I think it's an interesting one. Today, ESOPs are going through a lot of debate. I think I'll definitely share with my colleagues to think on how they can bake in some of these elements. I've heard in many places some of these are already covered. I think it's good to see that it is getting reinforced. I think one is the incentive structure. As I said, if the show has to continuously run, there are also reputation which needs to be maintained. And today, there are few areas which are strict, you know, areas which are very touchy in a listed organization. I'll probably come to that. Is maybe to start with like related party transactions. Today, there is so much of debate about related party transaction. There is so much of information, overload of information at times, changes in the regulations on related party. And maybe I'll come to Anurag to you on this. How do you think companies can strengthen the related party mechanism? One is the compliance. Okay, there is a way, what are the things to be done? And I'm sure everybody, when they plan to list or even before listing, they would have taken care of it. But as a mechanism, how do you make sure it is robust? It is ensuring that there are no risks or there are no surprises coming in.
Yep. Bhanu, I will respond to your question, but before that, I'll just try and build some context around it. You see, I am starting from right at the top of the organization, which is the board. Typically, in a board environment, and Mr. Subramaniam will very much agree with me, the board has very diverse, extremely talented, intelligent, perspective, highly opinionated people. And there are times that on one subject, there may be 5 different views, which is all right, which is actually not the challenge. The problem comes when there are two diverse and slightly polarized views. There is one view versus the other. And a related party transaction actually falls into that bracket, where you have a set of directors who will have a certain view on that transaction, another set of directors who want to understand a lot more before they can say yes. And I'm talking purely from a governance standpoint and looking at it from the board, but it has elements across all governance and regulatory requirement. The job of a CFO or the management team in this case is extremely, extremely, extremely important. You have to make sure that you get the right outcome for all stakeholders, both the promoter directors as well as the independent directors. And there is always this, right course of action that you can find. And therefore, you have to make sure that you as the management team is extremely convinced about the direction that you are taking the organization in terms of those transactions. So I'll classify these transactions into 2 different categories. One is, of course, the not so routine transactions, which are significant higher level of oversight, both by the independent directors as well as the regulator, which I will keep it aside. On an ongoing basis, there are regular ordinary course of transactions, which is what I will focus on, because that is where you need to have continuous dialogue with the board and keep, managing that piece. You have to use 2 lenses very, very strongly. One is that it is in the ordinary course of business. Prove to yourself every transaction that you're taking up to the board and the audit committee is in the ordinary course of business, and there is no clear definition in the law about it. So you have to define that very clearly in your internal process so that you can demonstrate that to the directors all the time. The second principle, which is the other side of the coin, and if you can apply that with the ordinary course of business, is the arm's length principle. So that's the other dimension that you have to make sure that, each and every transaction that you're taking to the audit committee is, so, following the OCB and the ALP principles, the ordinary course of business and arm's length principle. The few things that you can truly shine, one person who's managing the communication around these transactions to the audit committee can truly shine if you can do a few things right. And it goes back to proactive, early diving deep into the transaction and making sure stakeholders are aligned. And I use the principle, what I call it a dash. First is D, which is diving in deep into the organization, because it starts from building awareness in the organization across different stakeholders. Related party transactions are such that when they are in the ordinary course of business, people down the line probably would not think about it. They would just continue to do the things the way they are. So communication, education, diving deep into the organization to pull that information from within the organization. Then I say dash. So then I say A, which is, act early, making sure that the information that you are capturing is communicated across different stakeholders much earlier. Where we fail most times is we are surprising our directors that we are getting into a transaction and that by that time it is too late. And that is something that we can all proactively solve for. If we can talk about any upcoming such requirements, maybe in the previous meeting, and then, kind of follow it through in the subsequent meeting, seeking an approval, that gives them enough time to think through the transaction, talk to the different stakeholders, talk to the other board members, and get comfortable. The third I would say is, S, which is sharing as much as possible about the transaction much early within the different stakeholders. And then finally, I say H, which is harmonizing the principles of the transaction and getting an oversight, putting some controls in place for those related party transactions where there is, by all means, an oversight just beyond the management team, somebody who can certify and confirm to the board that everything is kosher. I mean, that's the principle that I use, and I think it does reasonably well in terms of giving the comfort to the board that is needed and getting the outcome that collectively as an organization that you want. But all is not still done till you actually make sure that there is good overall governance and control around this whole principle. You have to run this as a well-oiled process, quarter on quarter, repeatedly, and make sure that you are not just following the law of the land. There are certain things which are written in the law. Go beyond it when it comes to RPT, is my view, because the law says, you don't need to go to the audit committees to seek an approval for a certain type of transaction up to a certain threshold. I would say go beyond, because it's not about seeking approval and following the law. It's about building that trust, which truly makes sure that, the independent directors are feeling comfortable around what is happening in the organization. And that's what I would say. I mean, there are multiple things that you can do. A circular resolution seeking approval, I would say don't do that. That creates a distrust with the directors. So there are things that I would say, don't just follow the law, go beyond, so that you can actually make it work for yourself, is the way I would look at it.
Thanks, Anurag. I think go beyond, and I think the trust and integrity resonate across all the topics we covered. I think, yes, it's important to build that trust, and I think most important, you talked about that first. You should be convinced before you take it to others, and engage early so that there are no surprises. I think are really important points I picked up. Other nuanced topic in this, which is also again going through a lot of debates and regulation changes on insider trading risk. And I'll maybe come here to Ashish. Ashish, how can companies strengthen the and to mitigate the insider trading risk? And there are laws. It talks about 1, 2, 3. I think if you have to practically advise companies, what are your two suggestions on how companies should mitigate this risk?
Yes, Bhanu, as you rightly said, it is most talked thing in the market, and I mean, there are different times. I mean, if you see previously, we mentioned about having a trust and having the smooth policies and practices. So first of all, let's understand for a common person that what is insider. Insider is not. I mean, it is commonly mistaken that insider is the person who is working with the company or the management. But insider is anybody who is having price sensitive information, which is not in public, which is unpublished, you can say. So it could be your auditor, internal auditor, external auditor, consultant, even a PR agency, all of them, including the employees and the management, of course. including independent directors. So all those people are considered as insider who are connected with the company, who have this information which is not yet in public. And if that information is there, and if it is disclosed, definitely somebody can use it otherwise. And for that, definitely companies have to strengthen the mechanism, because directly or indirectly your company's name is associated, and one has to be very careful about it. So first thing is, yes, definitely a continuous training is required with the employees, because as we have seen that once you just become public, initially for a few years, it is still a cultural change which is going on, and employees are yet to understand that how they have to behave once they become a listed company. So that continuous training is very important. You can have some internal MISs, you can have your secretarial person or the compliance person can send reminders about what are the trading window opening and closing dates, and all those things is there. And as Anurag was mentioning about, his word is technology is a game changer. Yes, it is, no doubt about it. And here also in mitigating this insider trading risk, today we have various softwares which can, check all those things, even with a PAN number, if you can give for those particular employees and the consultants and auditors who are working, you can track or you can stop them by trading all these things. Even by mistake, if somebody is doing a trading, probably those things can be stopped before they enter into any such transaction. So that way, yes, technology also is a very important tool which company can take, blue form and go with that. Because I've seen, as you're discussing today, exchanges and regulators are very vigilant. They are not acting after everything is done. They are acting very, very proactively. And one needs to be on their toes to do all the compliances properly, to understand what are the do's and don'ts one should understand. And so even, I've seen, and we were surprised to see that exchanges are immediately sending queries if they are finding anything which is not usual. They are asking specific questions and queries, which is actually a good thing. And it, it keeps you, you can say, more vigilant, to be more vigilant and up to date about it. So that is also, I would say, a part of cultural change which company has to do. So 2 points, as I said, one is training and developing your internal control system. Second is you can use the technology or IT enable solutions, which is provided by many softwares are available today in the market. Those two are very important to mitigate your insider trading risk.
Thank you. Yeah, technology is definitely, I think, with the amount of PAN numbers needs to be tracked today, KMPs and the designated persons and their relatives and their extended families, etc. I think there's a fair amount of work to be done. And I think one is technology. You talked about training people. If you don't educate people on what is insider trading, it can come as a surprise, right? I think, and we have seen many times it's also unintentional trading which gets picked up and then it's all over the media. Training people is and educating them is very important. Thank you. I think that's a good one to come up. You touched on external stakeholder management, on auditors, external auditors, internal auditors. I thought, okay, let me pick that one question with Subbu on external internal auditors. Subbu, from your experience as CFO earlier and now as director on many boards, how do you see the role of statutory auditors and internal auditors evolving post listing? I think there are obviously the regulations which sort of define what needs to be done, but I think as a director, how do you see the roles evolving? What they should be thinking of?
In principle, there should be actually no difference the way a statutory auditor or an internal auditor works in principle, right? But there is a very significant difference in the approach between a listed entity and a non-listed entity. In the non-listed entity, it's more about internal audit giving assurance to the management that things are okay. Okay, it's more about that, and particularly promoter. When I say management, it's also largely the promoter or the founder or whatever you call that person, right? It's more about that. Statutory audit also to some extent is coming in from that angle. Um, Therefore, the interactions which happen between auditor and management is all there is till a listing happens, right? Um, the interests of the parties are quite different. Okay, from a management perspective, it's about how do I get my point of view through to the auditor. Okay, I think that's where it comes from, and from the auditor perspective, how do I ensure that they also understand why I'm accepting or not accepting a certain point of view? Okay, I think that's where this comes from. I think it entirely changes when you go to a listed entity because there you have this new thing called the audit committee coming up, right? Which in a way is supposed to fight for for the minority shareholders and the and the non-founders and so on, those who are not in management or actually running the company. In a way, at this point, the interests of both the statutory internal auditor and the independent directors or the audit committee is aligned because it's actually making it easier. So in a way, they work off each other in a way, right? Because I think the independent directors, our audit committee, for example, I rely a lot on the internal auditors and the statutory auditors for their view of what's happening in the company. And I think those conversations are extremely important, those which are not just in the audit committee, but also outside the audit committee, right? That we all tend to normally have, right? At least I have that everywhere. So the point is, those I think are very, very important because there the interests are aligned, right? The questions which are asked are more about fairness, the right thing to do, rather than what is nice to do or what possibly the management or the company wants from a shareholder perspective. I think this is about actually being independent. So the questions which, for example, I've raised with statutory auditors would be coming in from a very different perspective. In fact, I would ask them to justify why a certain impairment is required or not required. And even if it is not required, why is it not required? Okay, so here you put on a very different hat and you're not looking at what the final number would like to be, right? You would want to see whether you're doing the right thing. I think that is one very important difference I see between listed and non-listed entities, the whole role of the audit committee coming in there and challenging the auditors to ensure that the auditing standards are fine and that everything is kosher and we are being fair in application of accounting policies and not doing it for convenience. I think that's one important thing. The second thing, of course, is once you're listed, the NAFRA comes into so every auditor himself becomes very different. I think the approach of the auditor itself is extremely different, which is welcome, which is fine. If you ask me, that's the way it should be all along. But keeping your papers right, getting the right answers, questioning everything, and now these four papers which have come up, right? The auditor, audit committee interactions, etc. These are very useful things if you ask me. So I think the roles are quite different while they are not supposed to be different at all, right? But it makes such a big difference the moment you're listed.
Thanks, Subbu. I think I would rather take the biggest takeaway is right thing to do versus nice thing to do. I think that's the biggest principle which should get applied. Of course, there are rules, there are regulations which needs to be complied, but I think if you follow this principle, I'm sure everything will get addressed by engaging the wider stakeholders. Thank you. I think this has been a great conversation, fantastic insights. Thank you all of you for sharing your insights. I mean, if I had to really summarize, there are a few words which I really picked up. If the show has to play well with a nice orchestra where everybody comes in and plays the role with trust and integrity, I think then I'm sure the journey will be far smoother and enriching for everybody as the companies go through post listing as well. Of course, with a lot of planning before the list, I think is the key takeaway for me. Thank you. Thanks for this. I think this is a really great conversation. I wish I could explore a few more topics, but I think my colleagues are saying, look, you've reached your time. Thank you for this. And I think we'll definitely look at for more conversations as we go along. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.